Hello everyone, my name is Shuaiqun. I'm a PhD student from Leiden University. I'm really happy to get this opportunity to introduce my paper in GECCO. The title of my paper is the Transfer Learning of Surrogate Model via Domain Affine Transformation. Also, thank you very much for all my collaborators. So here's the outline of my today's presentation. Surrogate models are widely used in many scenarios in both machine learning and engineering. Training a high-accuracy surrogate model often requires many sample points, which is usually costly to obtain. In this paper, we would like to reduce this cost and we could reuse already trained surrogates in future tasks. In this paper, we study transferring a surrogate model trained on a source function to a target function using a small dataset. As a first step, we consider the following assumption, which is a special case of domain shift. The domain shift refers to the difference between the source domain, where the model is trained, and the target domain, where the model is going to apply it. In our paper, we assume the domains of the source and target function are related by an unknown affine transformation. Okay. So in our case, we explored adaptation of surrogate models when transferring from source to target domains under the presence of domain shift. The surrogate model's predictive distribution remains unchanged between the source and target function. This implies that the fundamental relation between the input features and the predictions is preserved. So we assume the input distributions between the source and target is modified by an affine transformation, namely a composition of rotation and translation. So the W here denotes the rotation and the V is the translation. To help better understand the rotation with the BBOB functions, I show two plots here. So in both cases, the left denotes a region function, and the right-hand side denotes there's a rotation difference compared with the origin. So taking the above assumptions, the surrogate model on the target problem is as the following, which means there's only the difference between the source and target domains, which there's a rotation and translation. So we learn the parameters by evaluating the performance of the surrogate on a small sample dataset generated on a target problem. And the transfer learning test is to minimize the above empirical loss. If the above loss function is continuous differentiable, such as the Gaussian process regression, we can solve it with the gradient descent method. So for the rotation parameter W, we can directly search on the special orthogonal group by computing the remaining gradient. The remaining gradient is a concept from remaining geometry that extends an idea of gradient of a function to curved spaces or manifolds. So in clustered optimization on Euclidean space, the gradient of a function provides the direction of steepest descent. So similarly, the remaining gradient on a manifold point in the direction of steepest exit, but it's adapted to the geometry of the manifold. So to search the translation parameter V, we simply apply the vanilla gradient descent. We experimentally validate our translating method on 24 BBOB functions. So for each source problem taken from BBOB, we create its corresponding target problem by randomly generating a rotation matrix and a translation vector. So we choose Gaussian process regression with the Gaussian kernel, resulting in a smooth model as the surrogate model. As for the performance measure, we take the evaluation matrix, the symmetric mean absolute percentage error. For the robustness of the experimental results, we conduct 10 repetitions of the transfer learning method with randomly generate affine transformation on each BBOB functions. So to minimize the loss function, we performed our proposed remaining gradient descent method. Also, we do turn the hyperparameters of the transfer learning method with the following settings. Here, I illustrate the effect of our transcendental method applied to a Gaussian process regression model on the 2D BBB functions, which is F4 and F12. So from left to right, the plots show the source function, the target function resulting from annual affine transformation includes a rotation and translation. So the source function and target function here has the only difference is the rotation and the translation. So the original GPR denotes the Gaussian process regression trained on the source function. And the SMAP value geometry here denotes the original GPR is going to evaluate on the target function directly. The trained with 50 samples denotes a Surrogate model trained from scratch with the only 50 sample size to evaluate on the target function. And the transfer with 50 samples denotes the Surrogate model resulting from transferring the original function using the same samples by means of an affine transformation found by proposed transforming method. The plots trained with 100 samples and transferred with 100 samples show the effect of increasing the number of training and transfer samples, respectively. So in these two cases, we can aware that the original GPR is always the worst cases compared with the two models. So no matter the size of the transcendental dataset, the transfer model is always outperform the model trained from scratch in these two cases. In this plot, we are showing all the comparative results between the GPR trained from scratch and the transfer GPR among the 2-dimension, 5-dimension, and 10-dimension results in this heat map. So in the x-axis, it shows the 24 BBOV functions, and in y-axis, it shows the 2D, 5D, and 10D with different sizes of transfer datasets for the transfer process. So for example, in this row, it means the 2D experiments with only 50 transfer learning datasets. And the red cells indicate that the transfer model outperforms the one trained from scratch. And the blue one denotes the GPR trained from scratch outperforms the transferred one. So this is the table to compare the original GPR trained from scratch and the transfer GPR on 5-dimension BBOB functions. So in our paper, the appendix part, we also have the table for 2D and 10D. So in this table, we include the results for two sets of transfer data, which is 50 and 250. Also, we compared the symmetric mean absolute percentage errors of the three models and indicate the statistical significance as follows. So the transfer model is underlined if it outperforms the original model. Among the transfer model and the one trained from scratch, the better one is indicated with boldface with the significant difference level. So overall, in 50 BBOV functions, the transfer GPR consistently outperformed the one trained from scratch and the original GPR at both 50 and 250 transfer data points with only a few exceptions. So for example, on one of the exceptions is the function F16. So the performance of both transfer model at this sample size is identically the same, right? Also, on F23 is another case, which is the assumption that the original model outperforms the transfer ones. So a closer inspection shows that the GPR model trained for the original function is highly energy-fitting for the function F23. So in this scenario, it denotes our method should be applied when the original Gaussian process regression performs well before the transfer learning. Further, we show a more detailed picture of the relation between the model's performance and the transfer sample size in this figure. So in this figure, we can see that the x-axis is the different sample size of the transfer data. For example, we test from the 10 transfer sample size to 20, then to 250 in 5 DBBB functions. For the y-axis, it denotes the evaluation metric, the SMAPE score, to compare the original GPR, trained GPR from scratch, and the transfer. So from the train of the SMAP curves, we see that the transfer model outperforms the model built from scratch until 250 samples for most functions. Also, on some functions, such as F21 and F22, we notice that the model trained from scratch starts to outperform the transferred one with a much smaller sample size, such as 20. So such functions either like a global landscape structure or are highly multimodal, which is difficult to approximate with a surrogate. For the other cases, such as F16 and F23, which we also observed from the previous table, they are highly periodic, which makes the landscape very challenging to approximate with a GPR modeling. So as you know, when we building the original GPR, we already used 1,000 times dimension data to build, which is quite a lot of data. And also in the appendix, we also have the similar plots like this, like the SMAP curve for the 2D and 10D, which is providing for further check. So building on the above findings, we take a look of cases where our transfer learning approach doesn't get the very satisfactory results. So we first zoom in on the cases of the linear slope in the 2 dimension. So for which we observe that the transfer model is outperformed by a model trained from scratch. So to investigate why this is the case, we repeat the transfer process with several different sample sizes from 10 to 100. So this figure denotes the box plot of the 10 repetitions on GPR trained from scratch and the transferred GPR. We should note that the relative large variance in the transfer model, which might indicate so that the optimization problem of finding the correct rotation and translation differs in difficulty between the different instances, with some instances being relatively hard to find the exact parameters. So because of this, for very simple functions such as the linear slope, finding a good fit for GPR with the limited samples can be easier than finding the transformation required to fit an extreme model to the new samples. So for the functions F16, F21, F22, and 23, so all these functions have a complex landscape topology. They either lack a global structure, such as F21, or the highly periodic, which is the F16 cases, which makes the landscape very challenging to approximate a high quality GPR performance. I mean the surrogate model. So therefore, we argue that the proposed transfer learning method should only be applied when the original GPR model performs reasonably well based on the Vermetten dataset. We have another case study for the boundary effects. So even in the cases where the model seems to perform well, some inherent limitations of our transfer model should be kept in mind. So in particular, the fact that we include rotation in our set of transformation lead to boundary effects. As you'll see in this plot, after the rotation, we can see there is a shift, which, for example, from this case to this case, we can see that there are some data which is really out of the boundary, which is shift in, and for some cases, after the rotation, there's some shift which is previous in the original domain and shift outside the boundary. So this phenomenon underscores the need for enhanced modeling strategy to better accommodate the boundary penalty. So overall, we propose a transfer learning approach for surrogate regression models such as the Gaussian process regression. We observe the domain shift among different regression tests where domain of a source and target functions are related by a node affine transformation. So in our method, we propose an optimization-based approach to learn such a transformation with a small transfer dataset obtained on the target function. The learned transformation is then used to transfer the model built on the source function to the target. Conceptually, when acquiring new data points on the target is costly, our method with a small transfer of data can be simple efficient than constructing a surrogate model from scratch. So in general, the results confirm that given a relatively small transfer data, for example, only 50, the transfer GPR model achieves much better performance on a target than the GPR trained from scratch with the transfer data. Several exceptions are noticed where the transfer learning doesn't improve much, where either the source function is too simple to approximate, such as the linear slope, or the original GPR model performs poorly, such as the F16 or F23, due to the complex nature of processing those functions. For such cases, we cannot determine the quality of different affine transformation on the target, and we argue that such cases cannot be solely improved by transfer learning only. So in the future work, we certainly expect that many real-world scenarios will require the nonlinear transformation, and we plan to extend our approach in this direction, for example, by means of input-output wrapping. Another interesting research direction is applying the same idea to other regression models such as the random forests and neural networks. Also, it is also meaningful to experimentally analyze the boundary effect of our proposed transfer learning approach.